afternoon to all our esteemed speakers and participants who have joined us today from the different corners of the world. Today, we have gathered over here for a dialogue around gig workers' welfare in India, focusing on the concerns and solutions related to the digital labor platforms. This roundtable is in collaboration with GIZ Germany and CUTS Institute for Regulation and Competition. I will now take a moment to introduce you all to our speakers and provide a brief on the agenda for today's event. We have Ms. Sarah Wagner, Project Manager at GIZ Germany, and Ms. Vela Kigbiru, Doctoral Research Fellow at the Technical University of Munich, Germany, amongst us. They will be presenting on GIZ's initiative with respect to the gig economy. Followed by their presentation, we will also have a brief presentation by Ms. Sanchita Chatterjee, Fellow at CUTS International, on CUTS' work on the gig economy. After the presentations, we'll move forward with the roundtable discussion. We have today amongst us Dr. Shubhashish Gangopadhyay, Research Director at Indian Development Foundation, Dr. Aruna Sharma, former Secretary to the Ministry of Steel and a Distinguished Fellow at CUTS, Professor Varnali Bhandari from the National Council for Applied Economic Research, Ms. Gayatri Vasudevan, Chairperson at the LabourNet Services India Private Limited, Mr. Badal Malik, CBO and co-founder at Karma Life AI, who is yet to join us, and Mr. Ujjwal Kumar, Associate Director at CUTS CCIR, as our panelist. We will also have Mr. Bipul Chattopadhyay, Executive Director at CUTS, as the moderator. Coming to certain house announcements, each panelist will be allotted 7 to 8 minutes for presenting their views on the questions posed to them by the moderator. After our panelists have put forward their views, the floor will be opened for discussion, which will include all our participants. We will also request the panelists and presenters to please keep their videos on so that the event becomes much more engaging. We also request only the person who speaks to turn on his or her microphone, and the other participants are requested to kindly keep their microphones off when not speaking to avoid any inconvenience. Lastly, participants having questions are requested to either raise their hands or post the same in the comment section along with the name of the concerned speaker to whom the question adheres to. Now I would request my senior colleague, Ms. Vaditi Singh, for her welcome address. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Tashmita. So I would join Tashmita in welcoming you all to this very important discussion on gig workers' welfare in India. It is really heartening to see such a diverse group of experts and stakeholders gathered here today to address the pressing concerns facing gig workers in our country. So the gig economy has undoubtedly transformed the way we work, offering flexibility and new opportunities. However, it is essential that we recognize that behind its glossy facade lie real challenges that gig workers face every day. I mean, from lack of social security benefits and healthcare to concerns about fair wages, job security, and labor rights. Gig workers often find themselves, navigating a precarious landscape with little support or protection. Hence, we are here today to shine a spotlight on these concerns. Let us all delve deep into the issues facing gig workers and brainstorm actionable solutions that can make a tangible differences in their lives. We are here to learn and collaborate towards finding meaningful ways to improve the welfare of gig workers across India. Your insights, experience, and ideas are invaluable as we work together to address these critical challenges head-on. Once again, I would like to thank all of you for being here and joining us today. And moving further, now I would like to call upon Sarah from GIZ to share her insight with us. Over to you, Sarah.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks so much for the invitation. I'm excited to be here and present our initiative. Let me just briefly check if it works to share my screen. Are you able to see the screen right now?
Yes, we can, Sarah. Thank you.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Perfect. Fantastic. So I'm Sarah. I'm an advisor and project manager at GIZ, so the German Development Corporation. And I'm here today to present our gig economy initiative and the courses that we're developing for policy stakeholders and for workers. And then afterwards, one of our key experts, Vella, will present will focus more on the content discussion. Now, before I tell you more about who we are and what we do, I just really want to make sure we are all aligned on what the gig economy actually is. As we have realized, as we speak to stakeholders, that there are different understandings, and we define gig economy as essentially matching of supply and demand of labor, usually on a very kind of short-term basis. Then that labor, that work really happens outside a usual, normal, formal employment relationship. And then this matching happens and is mediated through a digital labor platform. So what type of digital labor platforms are they? Usually we have these two different types, which are exemplified here. On the one hand, we can say that those platforms that really, in theory, where the work can, in theory, be performed from anywhere in the world. Let's say we have a consultant who offers the marketing expertise on Upwork, or someone who makes a website for someone else. Like these kind of services, you can sit in Nairobi and work for someone in Germany or vice versa. It doesn't really matter where that person is based. On the other hand, though, we have the location-based work, where the work really is required to happen in a certain location. And here you can see a variety of examples. For example, if you order your food, it's quite essential that for example, Uber driver is actually located in the city where you are. Otherwise, you will not get your food. Now, let's very briefly also look at okay, now my slides are not working anymore. Now, I want to look at the size of the gig economy. Are you able to see the next slide? Because it's not moving anymore.
No, Sarah, we can't.
Can you see it now?
Yes, now we can.
Perfect. Fantastic. Essentially, this slide is just briefly supposed to show that the gig economy really is supposed to stay. It's not a thing that just came up a few years ago and is going to leave us. And these numbers show why. Because essentially, we can say that already in the global south, in low and middle income countries, at least 150 million people, gig workers, are active, and that's a very conservative assessment. And also now the slides seem to have an issue, but essentially we can say that 1/3 of work already is mediated through the digital labor platform in the world by next year, which is quite a number and really shows the importance of labor platforms as we move forward. Now, I don't know what is happening. My slides. Technology. Give me a second. I'm just trying to, and I'm click on my slide. It's not now. Fantastic. Yeah, so I was just saying, okay, we understand now, we have a common understanding of the gig economy. We understand it's quite big and it's becoming bigger as we speak. With that, we have consequences, right? On the one hand, we have positive consequences, but also challenges that we have to be facing. And on the one hand, we can say what is obviously positive is that digital labor platforms offer a lot of flexibility. You can perhaps decide when you want to work, if you want to work in the morning, the evening, how many hours you work, if you want it to be a little side gig or actually your main job. And that at the same time offers more accessibility for all type of workers, and particularly also disadvantaged groups. And also, of course, it offers work across the border, because as I was saying, a person can be sitting on continent A and offering and delivering work to someone sitting on another continent. Or another example we often like to speak about are women in particular, right? Imagine you're a stay-at-home mom. You have to look after your children, but at the same time, now you have the opportunity to sit in front of your computer while you're taking care of your child at home and earn money. That's fantastic. Obviously, there's also a downside to it. And we could speak hours about it, and I'm sure all the other panel experts will talk about it in more detail. But very briefly, we can, of course, say that we see unfair working conditions rising, particularly also because there is no new regulation in place yet that takes care of these new developments. And that's why we're actually here, and we are wanting to enhance working conditions of gig workers. And this is now kind of the transition to our initiative. Really, the main goal of our initiative, and really we are an initiative, a project, a pilot project within GIZ, is to enhance the working conditions of the gig workers that are offering the labor on digital labor platforms. And we have this kind of threefold approach that we're trying to illustrate with this slide. Essentially, we're on the one hand working directly with workers. So we're offering capacity development tools, online courses, workshops, seminars to really educate workers about their rights, and also really help them to upskill or reskill perhaps to really excel in the gig economy. Now, on the other hand, we also engage directly with platforms. Primarily, we do that with the help of Fair Work. I'm sure most of you here in the room are familiar with them. Essentially, what they're doing is score the working conditions on a fairness scale. And that kind of helps then afterwards to really engage with the platforms and see how they can enhance and improve their the conditions in the long run. And then on a macro level, and that's where I'm coming in particular, we're engaging with policymakers, but really also any other key decision maker in civil society and in business, and we want to educate them about the risks and the challenges, so that in the long run, we see more agile regulation that caters for the issues, but also, of course, the potentials of the gig economy. Now, how are we doing this? I think I just skipped this slide now. We have developed an online course consisting of 9 modules, and it's a very broad course. Essentially, we're offering introductory courses, like the first 2 modules where we really speak about the rise of the gig economy. It's really about understanding really what enabled the rise of digital labor platforms. Really, we want people to grasp the key concepts surrounding platform and then how they create value and capture value. And then it's really the second one also about understanding the nature of digital labor platforms and how they do challenge existing conventional regulatory approaches. And thereby we really also talk about why digital labor platforms have become such a topic of regulatory interest in the recent years, and what kind of key regulatory gaps we have to deal with. Then very briefly, the third and fourth module, they focus more on the aspect of labor. So we look at the concept of the future and work, and highlight a little bit the changes of the yet, I guess, to be determined employer-employee relationship, because as I said in the beginning, we are not talking about a traditional employment relationship anymore. And also we explore I guess the main characteristics of standard forms of employment and how they do differ in comparison to new forms of work. And then in the fourth module, we really talk about what constitutes decent work, what is that, and what are the minimum standards. And obviously here we are working also with ILO and looking at the different standards that they have developed. Then very briefly, as this is important also to transition to Vela, we also have more kind of more focused topics such as data, competition, and taxation. So module 5, we talk about how data and algorithmic management function. We look at how competition, how competition law can help to regulate digital labor platforms and what are the limits of it. And then in that context, we also look at taxation. And as I briefly mentioned, also the role of women is very particular. And we want to highlight how women can benefit from the gig economy and what are the major obstacles for them to enter the gig economy. And my colleague Vella, in a moment, who developed with us this module 6, will talk a bit more about really the content of that module. If you're interested also in working with us afterwards, feel free to get in touch. My colleague Enrique, perhaps you could kindly also share the relevant links if anyone is interested. We have not done this on our own. We have been accompanied throughout this lengthy process over the past 2 years by fantastic experts from the World Bank, from ILO, from Fair Work, and from the European Commission to really make sure that all perspectives are included in this process. And yeah, the courses are available in the Tingy and SADA. And just to end on a kind of positive note here, a few insights from the many events that we participated over the past years, where we really presented the course and also organized different workshops and seminars. So thanks so much for your attention, for your interest, and I'm very much looking forward to an exciting conversation today. And I guess over to Vella, or back to the moderator.
Thanks, Sarah. So now over to Vella.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah, for the presentation. Sarah has mentioned a lot of the things that I was going to talk about. Just move to the next slide. So I'll briefly look at what are some of the regulatory frameworks that different countries have adopted, and then also look at the potential and the limits of competition law in regulating the gig economy. Let's move to the next slide. So I'll not take so much time on this slide because Sarah already mentioned what is gig work, which it encompasses temporary and part-time work with independent contractors or freelancers contracting for specific pay. And just continue moving on. And it's also an intermediary market whereby we have 3 participants. We have the platform that is providing the jobs to the gig worker, and then we have the customer or the client that needs that specific work. Just move on. So Sarah has also talked about the types of the gig work, from crowd work to work on demand. And if you want to have a deep understanding of all these concepts, you look at module 1 of our GIZ online course modules. So as you see, there's an increase in gig economy, especially in developing countries. It's creating employment opportunities and also supporting economic development, trade, and investment. And there's also demand for gig workers, especially from global north, because gig workers coming from the global south provide cheap labor for the growing gig economy companies. So let's move on, because I don't have a lot of time. So also we are observing an increasing growth of homegrown digital platforms in emerging markets that are trying to compete with the existing foreign markets in this specific kind of markets. So let's move on. So this is really where I wanted to focus on some of the regulatory issues. And as Sarah talked about, the issue of the gig economy providing flexibility for mothers working from home and so on. Some of the regulatory issues and concerns that arise, not just previously in the gig economy, is the first one is the issue of the employment status of gig workers. And we all know that for an employee to benefit from employment law or to benefit from competition law, they have to be categorized as workers. So there's a big issue as to whether gig workers should be recognized as a new category of independent workers, because when you look at their working relationship with the platform, you realize that they tend to fall more on the side of employee status. That is, we can observe that the digital labor platform the digital labor platforms are exercising a substantial control over some aspects of the DLP workers' working arrangements, for instance, their working schedules. We can also observe that gig workers are economically dependent on these DLPs. they work mainly maybe for 1 or 2 DLPs. So the main source of their income come from 1 or 2 digital labor platform. And we can see some sign of permanency. If they're working for one platform, you can see that most of them have a relationship of permanency with these kind of platforms. And also in some cases, there's limited multi-homing among the platforms. So this is one of the regulatory concerns that we are going to discuss. The next slide. So another regulatory issue that Sarah has mentioned is that there's an increasing exploitation of workers by digital labor platforms, and it's evidenced by the growing protests that we observe from these workers protesting against poor working conditions, such as low wages, low working hours, insurance, health and safety, and also the kind of working patterns they have with these digital labor platforms. Next slide. So another regulatory issue that is very important, especially for us, the competition law experts, is that this kind of market is highly concentrated. We have very few players that have gained their market power from data aggregation, from network effects, and also the first mover advantage. And network effects, which simply means that the value of a platform increases when certain users are on that specific platform. So platforms that were able to enter the market first, those that have a first mover advantage, they were able to get more users on those specific platforms. So if you're talking about the e-hailing app market, so let's talk about Uber. Uber drivers want to be on a platform whereby they can get more customers. So the more a platform has more gig workers, the more the customers want to be on that platform. So when new platforms want to enter the market and they're not able to access these the workers, or they're not able to access the customers, it becomes so difficult for them to enter and expand into that specific market. So network effects have become a barrier to entry, especially for homegrown platforms. So this is where the issue of competition law comes in. The next slide. And then finally, another issue that we are observing in this market is that the DLPs are also engaging in anti-competitive conduct that is exclusionary and also exploitative. And in most jurisdictions, we've been able to observe issues related to predatory pricing and also price fixing. And unilateral conduct occurs in scenarios whereby you find that gig workers can wake up one day and they have been delisted from the apps without any justifiable reason. And also exclusionary conduct in cases whereby platforms require the gig workers to work for only one platform. And this is really evident in developing countries. So what is the way forward? So next slide. So what have different countries done? So there have been different regulatory approaches and they vary across different countries. There are countries that have classified certain classes of gig workers as employees and therefore granting them labor protection. And this has happened in the case of drivers and also ride-hailing app riders. Others, there has been a judicial intervention where courts have classified some gig workers and they have emphasized the issue of control among these digital labor platforms. And in other scenarios, we've seen countries extending certain labor protection to gig workers, especially the right to collective bargaining. And in other scenarios recently, in the EU platform work directive has now been adopted, and they have introduced what we call the employment status presumption. Next slide. So this is how we can observe this. In 2021, Spain adopted a law, it's called the Riders Laws, and it recognized food delivery workers under specific circumstances as employees. Mexico and Thailand are also considering a law which is now in the draft process. And then we have India, which in 2020 introduced the Code on Social Security, extending social security benefits to some of the gig workers. And then we have the Rajasthan Platform-Based Gig Workers Registration and Welfare Act that was also adopted by one of the states in India. And I know my colleagues from India are going to discuss in detail regarding this regulatory framework. So next slide. So in Africa, a lot has not been done, but we can observe sector-specific regulation. For example, in Tanzania, the transport regulatory sector, that is the Land Transport Regulatory Authority, introduced commission caps for e-hailing apps, requiring that they should only charge 15%. But then one of the consequences of this regulatory framework, especially in Africa, is that Uber and Bolt suspended their services in Tanzania during that period, and then LATRA had again to discuss with them on the most appropriate commission cap. So they then increased the commission cap from 15 to 25% and also introduced a booking fee of 3%. And also in Nigeria, we observed that now a trade union has been registered in Nigeria for the e-hailing app drivers. And also in Kenya, it was the same as Tanzania, where the Kenyan government introduced a commission cap of 18%. Let's move to the next slide because of time. So that is what has happened in the labor regulatory framework. So there's an argument that despite the efforts that the labor regulatory framework is providing, competition law in itself has become a barrier to the enjoyment of gig workers' rights. And this is because under competition law, the labor exemption that allows employees and employers to enter into collective bargaining agreements for better working conditions does not apply to self-employed people that are recognized as undertakings. So the mere fact that gig workers are recognized as self-employed people, then they do not benefit from this labor exemption. And another limitation of employment law has been the fact that in most jurisdictions, when they've had a chance to investigate anti-competitive conduct by digital labor platforms, they have always applied the rule of reason. In this case, they look at the pro-competitive gains that come from that anti-competitive conduct, such as consumer welfare, low prices for the consumers, and so on. So in doing so, it has given these platforms more power. So the potential of competition law, as it's been argued, is first to extend the labor exemption to digital labor platform workers, either by legislation or judicial interpretation, but under specific circumstances. And also to look at other anti-competitive conduct engaged by DLP, such as, let's look at abuse of economic dependence if we are able to prove that the workers are economically dependent on these platforms. Because in most cases, most of the competition agencies have been looking at the abuse of dominance, which in most cases has not been able to prove that these platforms are abusing their dominant power. So let's just move to the next slide so that I can complete. So a number of competition agencies across the globe have adopted this. So I'm going to look at the Ireland case and the EU case. And then I will share these slides with all of us. So in Ireland, what happened in Ireland is that you can just move to the next slide. The Ireland Competition Act was amended in 2017, and it introduced 3 categories of solo employed workers. That is the relevant category, the false self-employed workers, and the fully dependent self-workers. So the false self-employed workers, these are workers whereby it seems like they are in a self-employed kind of situation, but when you look at their working arrangements, they're in the same situation as employees. And then the fully dependent, you can just move to the next slide, are those that are economically dependent on this platform. So in Ireland, if you fall under the false, you can move to the next slide. If you fall under the false self-employed kind of workers, then you are able to benefit from the labor exemption under competition law. So you have to show this, it's on a case-by-case basis that, oh, you're in the same situation as an employee, you have a relationship of subordination, you also follow the instruction regarding the time and place and the content of your work. So we can move to the next slide. So a fully interdependent one is whereby you can show that your main source of income is not derived from more than 2 persons. But then for other gig workers, especially in the digital market ecosystem, they can make use of Section 4 of the Irish Competition Act and then make an application to the Minister for Business, Enterprise and Innovation for them to be able to recognize them as either false self-employed people or fully dependent self-employed people, and then they are able to benefit from this labor exemption under competition law. So the next slide, where we are going to look at the EU. The EU in 2020 came up with the guidelines that now extend the labor exemption to platform workers, but only under specific conditions. One is where they show that the kind of agreement they're having is intended to improve the working conditions of the gig workers, and the platforms are not engaging in any anti-competitive conduct. So a platform and a platform cannot meet and discuss issues related to how much commission they should charge or how much wage they should charge to their gig workers. That one does not benefit from the labor exemption. So when you'll be doing module 6, which I wrote, you should be able to identify under what conditions is the labor exemption extended to digital platform workers. Next slide. So similar to Ireland, this is what will happen in the EU. These are guidelines, so it's not a legislation. So you should be able to show that you are economically dependent on the platform. And for the EU, they're using a quantitative threshold that you do not accrue more than 50% of your monthly income from one digital labor platform. Just as Ireland, you are in the same situation as workers, and then the digital labor platforms have also been recognized as the gig workers working through digital labor platforms will also be able to benefit from these guidelines. And also those will be reclassified as employees, either through the course or through directives, will be able to benefit from this. So let's move to the next slide. So this is not theoretical. So the Danish National Competition Authority had an opportunity to interrogate the issue whereby a digital labor platform in Denmark called Hilfa, which has 2 categories of workers. It has the freelancers and then it has the super Hilfa. So the freelancers, they do not have a working contract with the platform, but they can request for jobs through the platform. So what happened is that Hilfi entered into a collective bargaining agreement with the Danish Labor Trade Union in order to provide better wages for this platform. So the Danish Competition Authority said, no. Those that have freelancers cannot benefit from this collective bargaining agreement because you are setting a minimum hourly wage. And this was considered as uncompetitive because it created a price floor for the freelancers, limiting competition among them. So this is one of the things we are going to look at, and these are some of the things that competition authorities are going to look at, especially in developing countries. So last slide, which we are going to discuss today, what has really happened in emerging markets. For example, in India, we observed that in 2020, the Indian Competition Commission dismissed the case of Uber engaging on predatory pricing on the argument that Uber did not have a dominant position. So for the CCI, they looked at the issue of did Uber abuse its dominant position, and the same also applied in South Africa. And for those who followed the event we held with the African Competition Forum, I think 2 weeks ago, where South Africa mentioned that it's now paying more attention to the digital labor platform market. So finally, in the last slide, so what these experiences are showing us is that in most cases, we have to also, when we are looking at the employment status of gig workers, we should try to determine whether they're for self-employed people, but also the issue of just focusing on the employment status as a determinant for gig workers to benefit from employment on competition law is, for me, I think is not the best thing to do. We should look at first their working conditions, look at issues related also the economic dependence on these platforms and how these platforms have been able to gain market power and how they are abusing that kind of market power. And also to ensure that it's not only about the gig workers, we are also looking about competition also among the platform. Is the market competitive enough to ensure that new platforms can enter, expand, and work in this kind of market? And thank you so much. And this is the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Bella. Quite an exhaustive presentation, and I'm sure we would all learn from it, and it will help us in finding the right solutions or actionable points that we are intending to do today. So moving forward, I would request Sanchita to please share your presentation with us. Over to you, Sanchita.
Thank you, Varidhi. Good afternoon, and I guess good morning to the participants. I'd request Tasmita or Keval, someone to share my presentation. Yeah. Okay. Can you make it full screen? So I'll be talking about CUTS work on gig economy, specifically in 2 projects where we looked at welfare of gig workers. Next slide, please. So these projects, we group them together and we call them Grow Jobs projects. Here we are talking about creating good and better jobs. So good jobs and better jobs than those that are there right now. Why? Because quality of jobs created, not just number of jobs, quality of jobs created is a significant concern in India. We are talking about, wages, working conditions, benefits that workers receive. And mostly we are focused on unskilled or workers who are at a lower skill category in these projects. We are also arguing that success of growth models, economic growth models, existing models, or any alternate models which anybody might propose would depend on investment in skill development and workers' welfare. Next slide, please. So these projects, I'm not going to repeat the full name. So we call them as Grow Jobs 1 and 2. The first one ran from 2018 to 2021. And it undertook groundbreaking analysis for promoting a narrative on good and better jobs in India. And it highlighted that workers' welfare should not be considered a cost, but should be seen as an investment towards human capital formation. And in the phase 2, we are basically building on this narrative, and we are talking about an alternative, inclusive, and sustainable model of economic growth where companies balance the profit maximization with their focus on workers' welfare. Next slide, please. So specifically, I will talk about Grow Jobs 2, where we have focused on gig economy. The expected outcome in this project includes knowledge generation and a better informed discourse, but also forming alliances between different stakeholders for institutionalizing the key messages of good and better jobs. We have conducted one study, we have written a paper, and now we are conducting a 3rd study where we have looked at gig economy. The first study looks at the issue from the company's point of view, or the ones we call aggregators, their point of view. And in the next 2, we have surveyed gig workers. The next slide, please. Next slide, please. I will not explain the concept because I think Sarah and Vela have done a wonderful job of explaining who we are talking about. I'll just add, in this project, we are talking about workers who are lower skill, who are at a lower skill categories. Though, yeah, when we have interviewed companies, they have talked about skill shortage in higher skill categories. But for our survey, for example, we have focused on workers at lower scale categories. Next slide, please. So this is the first study, Workers' Welfare and Corporate Strategy. Next slide, please. For this study, we have interviewed a certain number of companies, I think about 40 or 45 companies, very in-depth qualitative interview. And gig economy is one of the sectors we looked at. And the aim was to assess strategies of these companies on workers' welfare and their perspective on human capital formation. We had 9 aggregators who we had interviewed. And this includes food delivery aggregator, online e-commerce retailer, or you can also call them e-marketplace providers, and taxi aggregators. Some of the companies were quite huge, global companies. Among the findings, we have found that attrition among gig workers is quite high and can be traced to issues related to pay, incentives, working conditions. And there is shortage of people with specific skills. So this is Here, companies are talking about higher skill sets, for example, food bloggers for food delivery aggregators. And we've seen that companies are now looking at the previous slide. Companies are looking at different frontiers, like rural areas, for increasing their recruitment. And there are typically 10 to 40%. We don't have an average number, but between these companies, it varies quite a lot. Between 10 to 40% of female employees, but they are mostly in semi-skilled and skilled categories. Hardly any female employees in unskilled categories. Next one, please. Some of the best practices which the companies mentioned, and we like these best practices. For example, taxi aggregator it has launched a program to train women drivers. And these programs also have elements of financial management, mentorship, and funding. Then a food delivery aggregator takes a very holistic and rigorous approach towards attrition. So they calculate the cost benefit of attrition, and then they have periodic feedback sessions, and they have a system of incentives for their recruits. And then there are gig economy companies which have introduced moonlighting policy, which allows their contractual employees to work with other companies on a part-time basis after taking approval from the company. But it's not clear whether this is actually extended to unskilled workers, which basically is the main focus of our next two papers. The next slide, please. So the next one we examined is the Rajasthan Gig Workers Act 2023. Vela mentioned that some of the states in India have come up with their own act. So this is now a law. And this is a paper we prepared, and we did a survey in the city of Jaipur. The next slide. And we analyzed the status and issues of gig workers in Jaipur and implications of the act for workers' welfare. And among our respondents, among gig workers, we couldn't find our team couldn't find a single female gig worker. So all were male. Among the companies, there was one female that responded, but other were male. If you look at the gig workers, they say that most of them were, they say that they were involved in two platforms, two companies. Followed by those who said one, and then those who said three. Next one. The respondents' responses indicate that the gig work is primary source of earning for them. Typically, they spend 31 to 40 hours a week, or some of them spend even more than 40 hours a week in gig work. All the gig workers that were surveyed were unaware of a proposed welfare board under this act. So the act is has proposed this welfare board which will formulate benefit measures for gig workers. Generally, awareness of the act was very low among gig workers, and nobody was aware that there was a welfare board that was set up for them. When we talked to aggregators, they were concerned that there would be increased costs because of the act, because the act is also talking about a cess that will be levied on these aggregators. And there will be a kind of like a pool where the cess will be collected. I wasn't clear, at least to the aggregators, what would this pool will be used for. Next one. When we asked the respondents whether they receive any support or assistance from companies, all of them said, yes, they face difficulties. And we also tested relations between sets of parameters for gig workers. And we found that gig workers will depend on gig work for earnings when they feel they have job security, and vice versa. They will dedicate a greater number of hours to gig work when they feel they are adequately compensated. And they will engage in several platforms when they have flexibility. Now, it seems like intuitively this should be true. We also tested relationships between some other parameters, for example, between their education level and their awareness of government schemes or employee benefits, and we didn't find any relation between these. Next one. So this is an ongoing study we have undertaken, where we have scaled up the paper on Rajasthan Gig Workers Act. So there the paper looked at the act specifically, but also asked questions or collected information on some other things. We have scaled up those, and we have gone to 5 cities to collect more information and from more number of workers and aggregators. The next slide, please. So the aim is to assess implications of strengthening social protection schemes for gig workers on inclusive economic growth. So our premise is that better social protection measures will lead to increased formalization of their employment and contribute to inclusive economic growth. And we have initial findings mainly from Bengaluru and a few from Mumbai. And our team is also going to New Delhi, Kolkata, and Jaipur to collect information. The next slide, please. So this is initial finding. Among 81 respondents, there was 1 female respondent and 80 male. I think 1 female from Bengaluru. Contrary to what we found in Jaipur, in these 2 cities, or mostly in Bengaluru, the gig workers say that they are engaged in 1 platform mostly. And then followed by that 2 platforms and 3 platforms. The next one, please. And we also found that most of them have no contract with their employers, which is like overwhelming number. They have no contract. They are engaged without any contract. And most of them are also not taking advantage of government schemes. Only a few, only 7 say that they are taking advantage of government schemes. The next one. When we asked whether gig work pays more than alternative sources of employment, 2/3 almost say yes. And mostly they say that percentage of income increase due to gig work is in the range of 0 to 30%. The next one. When we asked advantages and disadvantages, and this, I think Sarah and Bella both highlighted these. So they appreciate flexibility of work, working hours, 0 barriers to entry and exit, location independence, extra income opportunities, but they don't like that there is no job security, no safety nets, and also no skill development. And there are issues with compensation. So I get the question is about fair compensation to their work. They feel that there are issues to that as well. The next slide. So a few recommendations from these studies. Firstly, strengthening trainings and skill formation, but we have to look at non-traditional methods and formats as well as the traditional ones, and make government enablers, but also government should ensure that employers follow recommended norms and rules, because our findings indicate that typically they bypass a lot of these norms.
Sanchita, I really apologize to intervene, but we are a little short of time. So can we do it quickly?
This is the last one.
Great, thank you. You please go ahead.
Okay. Boosting women's employment by tackling attitudes and making provisions as per women's need. And then undertaking information dissemination and awareness generation initiatives on these acts, as well as benefit and welfare schemes, and also having a system of social dialogues between different partners, different stakeholders. And lastly, have devised some kind of incentives by looking at their motivations and priorities. So that's the last one. The next slide, please. Thank you. I will be happy to take any questions.
If we have any questions, please, or we can take it during the later half of the session, if it is okay, Sanchita.
Yes, I'm fine. Anything
Okay,
else?
great. So, moving forward to the roundtable discussion for which we have gathered together here. So, I would request Bipul sir to please take it over as the moderator of the discussion.
Thank you, Varideep. Let me join you and other colleagues in welcoming all of you to this webinar. Good afternoon, everybody. I'll be very brief in my intro. I think both CUTS and GIZ, we are working on this sector, and there are several commonalities. We are trying to understand the market conditions. We are trying to understand what are the factors behind these emerging market conditions. But one caveat I would like to put forward at the very beginning is that we are talking about platform-based gig workers. We are limiting ourselves to that. Otherwise, the informal sector, informal economy in countries like us, I mean, there is a lot of, it's almost synonymous, or rather it is synonymous with the definition of gig work. So one or rather couple of questions which have already come to my mind, but I will, in the interest of time, I'll restrain myself at the moment and go straight to the panel discussion. But just before that, as some of you, if not all, would know that CUTS is a 40-year-old organization. In 1983, we started off as a consumer protection organization. So today being the World Consumer Rights Day, so on behalf of CUTS International, I convey our best wishes and will continue to work both for consumer protection as well as consumer welfare. So that is our raison d'etre. Now coming to this subject, essentially we are looking at the conditions which are, and that is the one common part of our work, conditions which are necessary for good and better jobs in India. And we have also looked at from Vela's presentation and Sarah's presentation, we looked at there are a lot of similarities between the, in case of market conditions in this sector in many other countries, both developed as well as developing. So a lot of knowledge exchange can take place between us. So with that, let me first invite Professor Subhasis Gangopadhyay. He is the Research Director of India Development Foundation. And I would request him to speak in about 7-8 minutes. The general problem about low wages which are encountered by gig workers in India and what could be possible solutions. We should not just talk about problems and challenges, rather we should also talk about equally important is solutions, not just in terms of laws, but also implementation of those laws or acts. So over to you, Professor Gangopadhyay.
Thank you, Bipul, and thank you, CUTS, for giving me this opportunity. But I must say, Bipul, that you just asked me to solve the gig economy problem.
Yes.
That's a tall order to be done on a panel discussion. But let's give it a try. I think one of the first things we have to appreciate is what you said at the outset, that India has an experience with informal workers and the way the informal market developed, barring the digital aspect, almost everything is there for the gig economy, right? Where instead of a platform, we had labor contractors. That was the only difference. And the same sort of problems that we are discussing in the gig economy, if you look at the literature in economics, the information asymmetry between the employer and the employee, and hence the role of the labor contractor as a certifier, because most of the skill training in India happens at an informal level. So there are no certificates and et cetera, all those informational issues are there in today's gig economy also. And most of the literature that is developing, tries to address these asymmetry problems. The second thing to keep in mind is that we already had something that is like the gig economy. The only thing that it wasn't was that the intermediation was not done digitally. Now it is being done digitally. So the first question we should ask is that, does this reduce the cost of search? This matching cost between employers and employees? Or does it actually reduce the compensation that you need to pay to labor? And I guess when you say that low wages, you're saying that yes, it is great. It improves consumer surplus. It improves, the surplus generated by labor, but labor doesn't get doesn't get it all. In fact, gets less than what it was getting before. Why? Because all that the platform or the intermediation has done is that the segmentation that it had created in the labor market is now gone, and hence people can, especially when the service is online and not location based, it is easier for people to compete. A Kerala online worker can compete with a Kashmir online worker or a Northeast online worker, and hence the segmented markets are gone. Right now, of course, this is not a problem. We should not consider this location based and online in the same vein, because if one looks closely, one would see that the online-based workers or gig workers are usually more highly skilled. So freelance journalists sitting somewhere in the country and writing for various news outlets or writing features, those would be online workers too, right? They're not associated with any particular employer. But these are skilled workers, and hence over there, the reduction in wage, what they can earn, as well as the larger market, they are balanced out, and it's probably better for everybody. But when it comes to the low-skilled workers, which is mostly the on-site, there the problem is serious. So we should not talk about a general reduction in the wages. We should try and make a distinction between what is the reduction due to the reduction in cost and what is the reduction because of the reduction in the opportunities or the compensations that the workers are getting. And I guess that's the problem you're raising. Now, that is a problem that cannot be solved by looking only at the gig economy. Because when in general, the level of employment or the ability to get employed is going down, right? Then clearly people for survival have to do other things. And indeed, instead of, just setting up a shop or running around, standing at the corner of the street, hoping to be picked up as a casual worker, now at least if they have the, if they're savvy enough to get onto the platform and, get themselves better jobs, you have to say that this is good. But the alternative is what you're considering, right? The alternative was really bad. The alternative was not a salaried job. But we're trying to compare them with what would have happened if they got a salaried job. Now, that problem cannot be solved through gig workers. That's a much bigger, larger economic problem, which we are trying to avoid by focusing on the gig economy. That is what I would say.
Yeah,
the
that's
gig
more
economy,
utopian.
That is more utopian, and that problem needs to be solved, right? It has nothing to do with gig working. In fact, gig working is allowing people to survive. Just as we say entrepreneur, but we also know that we should make a distinction between two types of entrepreneurs, right? Those who are trying because of higher profit or opportunity-based entrepreneurship, and the survival-based entrepreneurship. They cannot survive without a job, therefore they're doing odd things and calling themselves self-employed, right? Usually one person with no hired labor, or a labor who is not paid wages, right? Like a family worker. So, and we are calling them entrepreneurs. But, this is not an activity that we would want to do, for example. So that is something we have to keep in mind. This focus on the gig workers should not be, it should not become too narrow, because the problems concerned are larger than that. Now, if I were to look at the larger problem and still stay on the implications of the gig economy, The real problem I find with the gig economy is that it may lead to a lack of generation of human capital. In other words, it is true that the gig workers may become larger and larger in number, but they can never be 100% of the workforce. The real issue is given technology and given the manufacturing, IoT and service mix, right? And hence the IoT mix or the IoT part of the entire economic activity. Then there has to be a balance between how many gig workers there would be and how many, employed, usual contracted labor will be. And that is something that we need to figure out. Now, the problem with gig working is that all the learning on the job, or learning by doing, as we know, it becomes a bit of a problem, right? Because human capital cannot grow with the best technology. We cannot grow with the best teachers. We cannot grow with the best institutions unless the human capitalist per se puts in his or her effort, right? And that it's like teaching in the best school where the students don't come to class. It doesn't help. So, and they're going to put in their effort only if they're confident of a so-called ROI, right? The rate of return on their investment. And if our labor market is so bad, then the urge to generate human capital is also not there. Now, the question to ask is, with gig workers, are we going down that path even more? Because for us, human capital is a big problem. Because you see that, say, I remember about in 2011 when I looked at the monies that the first job that IT workers were getting, those who have done BTech, everybody who is doing BTech, whether in civil engineering or mechanical engineering, are going to the software companies, right? That immediately tells you that the type of work that they're doing is low-skilled software job, right? A low-skilled engineering job. Now, their salaries then, the first salaries then were 2.53 lakhs a year. Now, 70 to 80%, let's forget the 1 crore, job, salary, compensation, and all of that. But 70 to 80% of these people still get 2.5 to 3 lakhs. Now, unless you're willing to solve this problem, we are not going to solve the gig worker problem. And that's the gig worker problem just is a manifestation of this problem, that we don't want to share the surplus with our labor.
Absolutely.
So in other words, the only way we can address the gig worker problem is not by making new laws which cannot be enforced in any case, right? None of our labor laws are enforceable if the company or the organization or the entity falls below a certain level of size. The only way to address it is to increase the opportunities that are available outside. And therefore, I would say that focusing more on the formal labor market, how to generate that, would be a better deal for the gig worker community.
Ultimately, they will benefit.
So I will stop here, and we can come back to
Thank you, Professor
later.
Gangopal. We have made a note of whatever all that you have said, not what you have outlined a nice model for further future work on this subject. Thank you very much. I'll get back to you. Let me now come to Mr. Badal Malik. We understand that he has developed an app for the benefit of gig workers to empower them, particularly financial empowerment, financial resilience. So, Badal, Mr. Malik, if you can tell us briefly in 5 to 7 minutes the app that you have developed and how it is operational. The point is that this is the private sector which can provide some solutions to some problem. That's the important point that we need to keep in mind. So, over to you, Mr. Malik. Is he there?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello. Okay. Yeah.
Carry on.
It's nice to be here. Yeah. So I'll start by introducing the organization that I'm representing. I'm one of the co-founders of a company called Karma Life. We started in 2019 or 2020 formally, and we've endeavored to build a financial platform for gig and contract workers that is linked to their employers and aggregators as a channel to provide financial wellness. When we started this journey, and through the journey, we've picked up a fair amount of understanding around the lives and financial needs and behaviors of gig and contract workers, and we've tried to build the product in a way that actually addresses some of their very unique and specific needs. So I'll talk a little bit about that. So I think just in terms of our, maybe the way I'll structure this is I'll talk a little bit about what we saw to be, the most distinct needs, and then go into kind of how we solve for it. And if there's anything else you want me to talk about, I'm happy to, through questions. But, so one of the things that we realized and noticed is that, there is a lot of short-term cash flow volatility. And that is both on the, the income side in terms of, volatile variable income streams, but then also on the expenditure side. And that jointly kind of creates a double whammy and effectively addresses, I mean, it really creates havoc for the household. And this has been, I think, documented. In fact, I mean, I think there's a 2023 study by Dwara, which is, a financial diaries based approach, which, does a pretty good job of quantifying what kind of volatility, and it's very significant. So this is, this was one thing, and because of that, we also noticed that they were, so for these, for these little, because these billing cycles and payout cycles are not aligned, a lot of these workers were going to, really friends and family or small money lenders, but for more, when they were more serious needs. But it was mostly friends and family just going and having to, kind of beg for money and ask, for money to bridge the gap. And that, I mean, that had a, that took a toll on self-dignity, mental peace, and just a sense of independence. So that's, that was one piece. And when we did some research, 90% of, or I mean, above 80% of our, our users report running out of cash, before the next paycheck. I mean, less than a fifth of them have, credit cards, for many of the reasons that were already cited, because they're not, these are non-salaried, working contracts. Their credit scores are either non-existent or lower than the risky threshold, so on and so forth, and so they do not get access to formal credit. So one is just this kind of like cash volatility, very short-term cash volatility. The second part was working capital, right? I mean, these are workers that they sometimes travel from their hometowns. They need to incur costs for that travel. They have to find, they have to find accommodation. There may be rental, security deposits, down payments for working assets like, phone, vehicles, tools, whatever they're using, as well as operational costs like fuel or vehicle maintenance or even upskilling, right? And again, these are very productive uses of finance, which they just do not have access to. The third aspect that we've seen is, vulnerability to financial shocks. So there are, there are financial shocks. I mean, some of them are macro scale, some of them are, micro scale. But this, again, for many reasons that have already been expounded by others, these workers have particularly vulnerability to these shocks and can get set back pretty significantly when there's an adverse event. I think the most striking example was COVID. Maybe not so much for delivery folks because that was essential service, but if you looked at the mobility segment, it was heavily impacted, and a lot of people suffered as a result, and income levels have come down significantly since. a lot of borrowing, a lot of cut consumption. I mean, there is data available on this. And then lastly, we also kind of saw that there was an issue of delayed payments, right? I mean, a lot of these contracts, I mean, even though, I mean, traditional gig platforms, they, pay, on a weekly or a fortnightly or a monthly basis. Sometimes these institutional structures are such where you have a flexi staffing company that is, seconding workers to a principal client, and the principal client only pays after work is reconciled, and that may be a lag of 30 to 45 days. And so so that delayed payments issue is also a pretty significant thing. I mean, we've also know things about savings and insurance. I mean, there are some interesting aspects both on those, which is there's a contradiction, because on one hand, these workers, they're not able to save, but they want to save, they aspire to save. And if you ask them the reasons why they want to save, it's often around either children's either an emergency corpus, or children's education, or sometimes to set up a small business for themselves, because they see this as a means to an end. But they're not saving, and that's partly because of also the problem with rigid saving products that we have available in the market. There are ways to harness savings if we were a little more creative about it. Similarly, on the insurance and even pension side, they acutely feel the vulnerability associated with the job that they have in their lives, but they're not actually investing in insurance or in pension for that matter. So these are some contradictions that are there when it comes to kind of needs and behavior. Now moving on to what
to expedite, since we're already running late.
All right.
Slightly expediting.
Sure. I'm just going to talk about what we do. So at Karma Life, what we have done is that we have created a very, we've developed, let's say, 4 pillars of innovation, right? And I mean, these innovations are very specific to building a business model that is optimized towards gig workers. One is that we use data-driven models, and there too we rest heavily on work data. So we look at work patterns, we look at work histories, and we're able to give users a line of credit which they're able to use to bridge these gaps. It's a flexible, dynamic product. Repayment also is something that comes directly from the payout and can be flexible, depending on context. But so the idea is to, and what this has done is it's allowed us to include large swaths of people. We can anybody who is working has access to a credit limit, more or less, right? And so unlike a credit bureau score where 60% of the ecosystem would be prevented from a credit card like product, here we're able to give it to virtually everybody. Second is that the business model, we made it very simple and easy to understand. It is, I mean, liquidity in India is not cheap, but we, provide a simple usage-based slab, usage-based flat fee that is transparently told or informed to the user upfront, and they can draw money basis what they need, and they know what they'll have to pay for it. There are no hidden costs. Third is in terms of the distribution, we go through the employer and aggregator channel, and that allows us to reduce our cost of acquisition, which means that we're able to, kind of provide the service at a lower cost, and also incur, we get the work data, of course, and we also are able to tap the worker payout for repayments. And lastly, I mean, the way we built the product or the platform is to modularize it in a way that we can, plug and play various kinds of players on both sides. So on the financial solutions side, if you're just talking about credit, there are different types of credit, different liquidity formats, and so we are able to have different NBFCs plug in. We're not an NBFC at the moment ourselves, but also it could be an asset manager that wants to promote a saving solution. So we have licensed financial solutions or financial solution manufacturers on one end, and on the other end we have platforms, aggregators and employers that can embed and provide services to their workers. So let me stop there. I think I'm.
Thank you very much. I mean, as part of our work, Sanchita, we can note that I think it will be good if we can do a case study, of course, subject to permission. So a case study of this initiative. Now, let me come to Professor Barnali Bhandari of NCIRC. She has been working on social security policies, among others. So, Professor Bhandari, if you can tell us the important features of the social security policy or law or regulations that we have in India for gig workers, and what kind of innovative means that we can employ in future to make them more effective, more implementable, more effective. Over to you in 5-7 minutes, please.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, sir, for inviting me to this very interesting discussion. My comments are actually based on not just social security, but actually have worked on the food delivery platform sector. We assessed about 1,000 workers across the country, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 cities. And based on that, my comments will restrict to social security. But before that, I just want to emphasize one point which Dr. Gangapad had mentioned. When we talk about gig workers in India, but the word Sarah was actually using the words interchangeably about gig workers, gig or platform. Gig, it could be synonymous, but actually in India, it isn't. The Social Security Code 2020 actually distinguishes between two types of gig workers: platform gig workers and non-platform gig workers. And one has to be very careful when you use a gig worker, that what type of gig worker are you talking about? When we talk about gig, and other thing that I want to mention that very carefully is that while developed countries are going from traditional economies where you have more traditional employer-employee relationships to a more gig worker relationship, in India, in contrast, we always had informal economies. So this is nothing new, as Sir has mentioned already. It is the online intermediation. Now, why am I reinforcing this point? Because when you think about social security, at least in my work, what we found is exactly this: that there are workers who are having part-time jobs. I mean, I'm talking about the food delivery platform sector, and there are workers who are having what you call is long shift jobs, who are working on 12-hour slots. And there are workers who are this thing. So both of them are there, and about 23% were first-time workers, but the rest of them actually had jobs before, and they moved on or they're working simultaneously. So when we talk about social security, or when we talk about organized workers, the standard definition that at least I like to use is formal sectors. What am I liking to use is whether you have paid leave or not, whether you have pension or not, and whether you have a written contract of more than 1 year. So using these parameters, we actually compared workers across what the current food delivery platform worker is like, and what they were before in their previous jobs, of course, leaving out the students. And what we find is actually that most of them don't have a oral contract. This is not news to anybody who has worked on the labor market in India. So actually, we find that most of them are aware of, most of them have at least a contract that they have signed on. Whether they're aware of all the conditions or not, that is a different story. But at least they have a contract which they have signed on, at least digitally signed on to join the food delivery platform work. So there is a written contract, digital contract, and most of them did not have health insurance at all. And here, actually, 100% of the workers in this particular company, in this food delivery platform work, had actually had accident health insurance. What we find is, and they don't have pensions and they don't have paid leaves, unlike some of the temporary workers also. Or they were mostly in actually had those in their previous jobs, those pensions and paid leaves. So what we find is, the second point is that key point is that high income is the reason why people join food delivery platform work, and high income is the reason why people leave food delivery platform work. It's a stopgap arrangement. At least in our research, what we found is it's not a career. It could be different for different sectors. So when we club sectors, we need to be very, very careful. A taxi cab ride hailing cab sector is very different to a food delivery platform sector where you just need a mobile phone and a two-wheeler, access to a two-wheeler to start driving. Yes, they give you some training, and they give you upskilling and reskilling throughout the time you're in the program, but the entry barriers are very low. And they're very high. So what the question that here is social security. When we say social security, what do you mean by social security? We found that 62% of our workers, food delivery platform workers, had access to food rations, whether they were living in their hometowns or whether they were actually outside. By the way, we also found that food delivery platform actually creates local jobs. So tier 2 and tier 3 cities, they were creating jobs. And tier 1 cities, they were creating less jobs. So the question is that when we talk about social, and when we talk about the Rajasthan type of platform, Rajasthan board, while it's a very novel and innovative and a very good first step, the question that we need to ask, and then I go back to Dr. Gangopathyay's question, you have to think in a macro sense. Because what we find is, yes, there are people working on 2 platforms, very small proportion in our sample, but I've heard in other samples there are more. They're working on non-platform gig work and a platform gig work. They probably have a traditional job and still have a platform gig work. So there are all kinds of combinations that their people are working on. How do you say that you are going to give social security to one person and not the other? Do you stop giving out pension, or do you stop giving out health insurance, whether you stop working on the platform sector? And even in other research, my colleagues have done a wealth of research on other factors, rural, urban, so on and so forth. And together, if you look at the numbers together with gig and non-gig, I think the one key message that I know it's utopian, I know it's pretty impractical if you wear the macro fiscal hat, but the answer is we have to think about universal social security. It's hard to track people from a day-to-day basis. And what do you do when they stop working on the platform sector, when they move on to a better job, when they move on to some other job? I'm not even saying better. How are you going to say that because you're working on Zomato, Uber, or Swiggy, you get to a social security, and now because you're home drivers for someone, you don't? They also don't get any social security. So I think that is a key point. That is the Pareto optimal solution that after thinking about it for many, many months, the only Pareto optimal solution I think I can think of, the first best solution is a universal social security, which gives you access to food rations. Health insurance is absolutely important. Pensions is actually important. So on and so forth. But the simplest solution is the government pay, the companies just contribute. We have to think of simple solutions in India, otherwise it starts getting messy very quickly. Because otherwise, if you then go to the second best solutions, that basically means that company by company, you have to determine, which is a point which is raised by Sarah. You're assuming they're self-employed, but what if you are, and even in our social security code, the implicit assumption is they are self-employed workers, independent workers. But are they? And we all know that the answer may differ from company to company. So you actually need to look at these working conditions. And we know what the implications of that are. That is, if you are not a worker, if you are actually determined to be an employee of the company, which means this company will have to pay for your social security. So right now there is no way of determining that in our systems. I try to look, using the data that I have, I try to look at the autonomy question, because basically that is what is it. And autonomy is very different from flexibility. Autonomy is, the way it is defined in the literature is the worker determines how and where you work all the time. It's a combination of mechanisms. And at least in my work, I found that it was somewhere in the middle. It did not this thing. But of course, the answer may differ with different data sets, different sectors, and so on and so forth. So the thing is that, again, it's challenging to collect data at a national level sector, but there are sectoral differences. The answer is that we need to find the middle solution where we repeatedly come back to that universal social security. And if we don't find that, the second best option is the Rajasthan board, where you are actually only catering to platform workers, because non-platform workers, you don't have the data, so you can't cater. And or we find what the code actually has proposed is that we give them, the firms contribute a share of their annual turnover, and which then is help to fund the platform workers. So what do you do about non-platform workers? And these are the questions that we have to deal with. And I think the challenge is, again, how do you think about that? That how do you provide social security to a whole gamut of workers? Or how do you provide, so is the question as we go forward. I mean, and I think that's a crux of the issue as I see it here.
Thank you.
I mean, on and on present sector, but
yeah, thank you very much. I mean, very thoughtful presentation ideas. We need to see how we can take these ideas for it together. Let me now come to Dr. Aruna Sharma. As we all know, is a former Secretary, Government of India, and among various other engagement right now, she is a distinguished fellow of CUTS. So, Dr. Sharma, we are aware that this new law is coming, digital competition law, and the question is whether some of these market conditions which are evolving, and some of them could also be anti-competition, not anti-competitive. Do you think that this law and perhaps as a result of those anti-competition like cartel formation, tide selling, etc., there could be both welfare loss to consumers as well as not producers, these intermediaries who are using this platform, these workers. So, do you think that this law is going to address some of these challenges and how it can be better implemented? Since implementation is a big challenge in our country, as all of us know. Over to you, Dr. Sharma, in 5-7 minutes.
Right. Thank you so much. It has been wonderful listening to all the presentations and co-panelists' expressions around the table. What specifically you have asked me to address about the CDCL, which has been formulated and which is coming, whether it will be solving the platform workers issues, which has been listed by all the speakers who spoke before me. My answer is no, because when you look at the intermediaries are controlled by under the IT Act 2000. So it is very, very important to have a provisioning of fair play by the employers in the IT Act as well. And that is what is needed to be argued upon. I'll just give two illustrations. One illustration is recently what you read in the newspapers, where an entry barrier has been done by the big tech for the Android phone in their Play Store. For the enhanced commission will be charged, and only those who are ready to pay that enhanced commission will find an entry there. So from there, they'll reach to their clients for operating. Similar problem is being faced by the publishers, where these big tech are using their contents and not paying them for the loss of revenue, because the search engines are going by the big tech or Meta. So we have these problems which has to be solved with the provisioning of fair play and a monitoring mechanism and grievance redressal mechanism, even if we restrict ourselves only to the platform players. And when you look at the gig players which are contributing to these platforms in terms of the content part of it, in terms of the various kind of services part of it, in terms of developing, whether it is the gaming industry or whether it is the employers offloaded work being completed kind of an industry through this platform base, all will have to be sort of have a fair play provisioning into it. It is not just the cost part of it. Then what has been very rightly said, the problem we are going to face and we are facing, because what this Digital Competition Act is looking for ex-ante regulatory mechanisms. That is before the entry mechanisms. Now, in these entry mechanisms, if we are able to build the fair play, if we are able to inbuild the contribution they will have to make, as long as there is an engagement between the gig worker and this platform, of contributing to their pension, health, insurance, etc. kind of a service. So because they can have a unique number on which the contributions can go, even if they have a multi-employers or they are without employers or they have a shifting employers. Because this is what is the problem with the gig workers, because they have shifting employers. Today they may be working for A, tomorrow they are working for B, and there may be a gap when they are working for nobody. So for this kind of a problem, it has to be listed down as a mechanism as to what should be the contribution of the person who is paid, not exactly the word employee-employer relation, but whosoever is engaging them in the contract, a portion of that goes for this contribution, which take care of these kind of securities for these kind of gig workers. Now, that arrangement I'm not seeing in this anti-regulatory mechanism. So you can't expect that everything will get solved here. Therefore, it is very important to have a set rules which do come. So it has to be the IT Act, it has to be the Labor Department Social Code, and this digital competition law who are to work in unison with each other for the welfare of the gig workers. In the sense, it takes care, the Labor Code takes care of the mandatory provisioning of welfare measures, number of hours. It answers, today it is not answering to the part-time workers, so they become a part of it. Number of hours they are supposed to put, number of hours they are not supposed to cross. All that has to come under these code of Labor Code. And then the IT Act has to take care whether these intermediaries have a provisioning of an oversight of seeing that there is a fair play. Then in the fair play, the contract is not exploitative. The contract numbers are there. There is a grievance redressal. There is an arbitration provision, and that is the way it goes, which is already there. So what has to be defined is for these kind of new additions which are going to operate through the these intermediary platforms, which are the digital platforms. And then comes into what you call it as the digital competition law, which decides the mechanism or redressal where the correct amount is being paid, and the competitive measures of creating any artificial barriers for entry or sort of exploitative becomes the answer. Now, if you look at it, the problem is that the gig workers are replaceable. If A doesn't agree to the conditions, they can get it at a cheaper cost from B without following any of these protection measures. And that is where the law has to come to take care of the protection measures. So they are going to get it. And for non-platform based, unorganized labor issues, we still are struggling in this country to come up with a perfect solution. So it swings between a common umbrella kind of a welfare measures of food security or health care treatment or free education kind of things, vis-a-vis to that, them as a non-platform based employee, what should be the right and what they should give. So that has to be fine-tuned when you are going ahead with it. So there is a need of these three kind of departments and three kinds of law working in unison with each other when they are rolled out to ensure that the gig workers are on a contract basis, which lists down these minimum measures of contribution for their healthcare insurance, accident insurance, regular insurance contribution, as well as for their pension contributions. And whenever they are unemployed, they don't have anybody who is ready to pay it, then the gig workers themselves have to make a provision, or there can be a mechanism of maybe a maximum of 2 years of holiday for this premium, for these special kind of workers. So this is the mechanism on which it works for. This is the mechanism in which it goes away. And that is what I find completely missing in the today's thing. So we can't expect that this is going to happen. Another thing which I feel for the good companies, we can think it becoming a part of the ESG, the S and G part of it, which talks about the social, which makes it mandatory that when you are engaging these gig workers, you have to, the strength of the company or the ESG enumeration is done, whether they are making these provisions. And G is the governance, of course, and this becomes a part of the good governance part of it. When you are looking at the aggregators, like we have another problem that these aggregators, like what has been given as somewhere where the loan can be given or gap filling can be given or credit can be given platform. What is more important in for the aggregating anybody of this gig workers data to make them meet to the potential employers based on their talent vis-a-vis others. What is important for this aggregator is to have these additional welfare measures. It is going to be an add-on to the cost, no doubt about it. Now, question comes is who pays the cost? Whether it is the company which is engaging these persons or the platforms which are engaging these persons have to bear this from the profit range. In the sense, they will pass it on to the consumer or the ultimate client who is the user client, or it should be charged as a portion from these gig workers themselves. So this is the where this cost is to be borne at. And I think the better solution comes that it is built into the cost which is charged to the client and the company which is engaging them, which becomes a part of the ESG, and that is where it goes down. Because that becomes a cost to their earnings and secures them to their very vulnerable kind of replaceable jobs they are providing. Unless until they are an expert in their field and they are doing it more like a freelancer, otherwise they are absolutely at the mercy, and therefore they accept the worst of the conditions in the contract and engage themselves as the gig workers. So this is where the problem is coming. So I strongly feel that this kind of an arrangement is going to go a long way, which has to provide them the security, because with the lesser and lesser employment opportunities and more number of unemployment which is being recorded as the days are passing by, we have seen like Mr. Gangopadhyay very rightly said, we seem to be reaching a peak of unemployment. So under that, we have to provide a better conditions, better opportunities, and with more and more technology taking over, the requirement is also going to shrink. So we have a demographic dividend at a time when technology is taking over and shrinking the human jobs. We are at a very wrong space into the entire scenario. But that is the way we can go ahead with it, and that is the way we can provide for it. I think I'll stop here, Mr.
Thank you, Dr. Sharma. Very valuable points that you have placed before the table, including some possible solutions which you talked about. Let me now come to Gayatri Vasudevan. She has been working on skilling and reskilling, particularly the skill part of gig workers. And this is very important because we know that it's the technology, or the use of technology, which determines a country's growth. And also it's the technology, or use of technology, which determines wages. So, Ms. Vasudevan, we are very keen to know about your experience of working with gig workers on their skilling and reskilling parts. In 5 to 7 minutes, please. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you. It's been very interesting listening to all the fellow panelists plus experts earlier. I think first let me admit to what I do know and what I do not know. I think my experience has been more with the informal sector workers and less so with the gig workers. But because many of the gig workers function in the informal sector, I'll sort of take the area that I know. The issue with workers who do not belong to a single employer and not a long term is the same. How do you skill a worker, and who's responsible for it, and why should the worker get skilled? So let me answer it from 3 perspectives, right? Assuming I'm a worker who does not have a single employer. I may be on a platform, I may not be on a platform, but I do not have a single employer. Then really the question is, I need to do it for myself. So assume, for example, I'm a beautician on an urban company platform, or I'm a delivery person who is on any of the any of this, delivery, FMCG, food delivery, any of these FMCG delivery, or I'm on a quick commerce. The question really comes as to why should the person skill? That means to remain on the platform, I need to skill myself. So I would skill myself. That means it's an individual responsibility to skill rather than the companies or the platforms. I think I would look at it like that. The second way of looking at it is the platform doesn't have anybody who actually knows the skill set. And therefore, by definition, has to skill. If they don't, their business itself cannot run. That means customer will not come to the platform if the skill is not there. These are the only two ways that skilling, reskilling particular becomes an important issue here. Now, technology change, let's look at where technology change has become very, very contingent, right? It has been everywhere where informal sector workers work. In fact, they are hit by technology change far more than we have. Let me take an example. If you take two sort of more skilled roles that you have in the gig work segment, for example, auto service technicians, plumbers, electricians who are coming to your homes to fix these things. They've seen huge technological change over the few years, right? The last 2 decades, you would have seen them go from manual tools to technical tools, like, for example, power tools that are there for drilling a nail. You don't have hammer and nail anymore. Vehicles have changed. You had BS6 come in, then you have EV coming in, which is totally different. If you have to clean a drain, now there are drain, which pulls vacuum suctions which are available, which was earlier not available. So there are huge technology changes. You see beauty, there's a huge technology changes which are there, which we don't acknowledge often as technology change. So where I'm coming from is in the service sector, it is contingent that the worker needs to be skilled. Reskilling is whose responsibility, who pays is a big question. And one of the things that I've been asked to look at is saying government, aggregator, and civil society. Now let's take each of these people and who's responsible. I think the toughest one to do is government, because the mechanics of delivering reskilling for disaggregated workforce of varied age group is very difficult to do by state, according to. Even if state wants to spend, and it has really wanted to spend, there are programs like recognition of prior learning, etc. And I've been very involved in this. It works wherever there are large populations of workers, right? If it is a manufacturing, if it is a construction site, wherever there is large, it works. Wherever there is disaggregated fewer people, very difficult to deliver it, which means it becomes contingent on the individual. Many of these skill sets are adjacent skill sets and not the technical skill sets alone. So one needs to say what is the skill set one wants, and therefore what is the upskilling or reskilling that is required. Now let me then go to civil society, right? Civil society, I think in my mind, needs to create models. And I think that's where it will really succeed, if we create successful models. Unlike in any other domain, unfortunately, skilling and reskilling doesn't have a theoretical background in India. And I'm not sure of other countries, but at least I can say of India is, we don't know how teaching learning works for adults. We are all grappling with the issue that we're saying, okay, some is dexterity based, some is communication based. But fundamentally, we're grappling with the issues of how do we really skill, and what are the assessment frameworks. Our assessment frameworks that we have taken. So I think where I was coming from is the issue that we have to say is, depending on which gig sector one is looking at, where is it for the individual where it is important, where is it for the state can deliver, where is it the aggregator platform will do it by force. I think these are the 3 issues that we need to address. Then is the delivery of it. The delivery of it, in my mind, is about the teaching learning frameworks and assessment frameworks that are there, and how it get links to payments. So any upskilling or reskilling needs to get linked to payments. Otherwise, it has no meaning. One will do it only either because one's livelihood is at stake, or because one's wage will get better because of that. I think that's the one where civil society will play a maximum role in creating models which are good for delivery. I think that is where they will add value. I just want to make one more point, and then in the interest of time, I will stop. But when we say gig, we should actually disaggregate and look at sectors. What would it mean for agri-tech if it's gig where sale has to happen? That means what's the kind of reskilling which is required there? Is it digital or is it core technical skill? Like for a plumber or a car mechanic or a beautician, it may be a core technical skill. Whereas you may not add much value for a farmer. So I think it's important to define it well and then come to say whose role is what and where who has to deliver on it. Reskilling is often brushed under one umbrella, education, skilling, reskilling. It is, however, very disaggregated in my view, and because we don't take a nuanced view of reskilling, it often fails. And it only succeeds in white collar things, and the blue collar is left to itself to really figure out how they will skill, because they do it out of necessity. They do it for survival reasons, which in my mind is actually, they are the more evolved. They are the more evolved simply because for them, it's not, they do not doing it for any certification, but they're doing it simply to be relevant in the job market and make it happen. So the pressure on them for reskilling is very high. So it's for all of us to look to see the roles that we can play and how do we give it formalized credentialing.
Thank you, Ms. Vasudevan, for placing your thoughts. Let me now come to my colleague Ujjwal Kumar. Ujjwal, very briefly in 5 to 7 minutes, about the role of competition laws and policies in addressing some of these challenges.
Thank you, Bukul, and sorry for my throat. Kindly bear. In my opinion, competition law enforcement has a limited role to play in safeguarding the rights of gig workers. What we have in India, the supply of gig workers is exponentially higher than the demand created by the highly concentrated digital platform market. So the supply clearly outnumbers the demand, and the market is concentration. So the solution to the problem of market concentration, particularly the high concentrated digital platform market, can be achieved not much by competition enforcement, but by a whole of government policy approach, what we call as competition policy approach, including looking at data policy, national digital strategy, industrial policy, investment policy, etc. So that is why we have been at CUTS, we have been advocating for adoption of national competition policy, so that all the governments at the national and subnational level look things from the competition lens, and then similarly devise they formulate policies and regulations. What this approach can help in removing the entry barriers, availability of capitals, availability of a skilled workforce, proper guardrails for public safeguards, as well as some of the technological solutions that have been proposed earlier also. So this all will come into when we look from the competition lens. However, there are, when we look at the competition authorities for checking or reversing the phenomenon of increasingly concentrating market, we should understand that their focus is not dominance or market power or market concentration per se, but their abuse of dominance or market power. So mere having 2 to 3 players in a platform market does not by itself triggers their action. In addition, to prove that a firm is a dominant firm is also difficult when market share is taken as the main determinant. We all know that most of the digital platform market is a duopoly. Largely 2 players are there having 60 to 40 or 55 to 45% market share, and thus none is designated as a dominant player. So once it is not designated as a dominant player, then the question of abuse doesn't actually happen. And Vela also mentioned that CCI had said that Uber is not a dominant partner, rightly so, but it's a duopoly. So not be able to reverse the market concentration, in my opinion, is one of the biggest limitation of competition law enforcement, and that is why it is better to advocate for competition policy solutions and rely more on this approach rather than the competition enforcement. however, competition advocacy in this regard, the function of the competition can be very helpful. Having said that, there are ways that competition law and its enforcement can help to some extent, and I'll figure out some of it. The competition law of India has broad provisions which can be useful to be interpreted. It can help the workers' interest. First, in my opinion, is that there is a need to develop more jurisprudence and understanding on buyer's power. This is where the most problem of gig workers can be dealt by competition agencies. CCI has dealt, but I think it's very, very few cases. So more jurisprudence has to develop on this. From the competition experts, I also understand that the abuse of unlike the abuse of dominance, where you have to first prove the dominance, buyer's powers requires lesser fees. For this to apply, one need not necessarily be a dominant player in the market. If we go by definition of consumers in the Competition Act, the digital platforms will actually be the consumers of the services that gig workers are selling. And similar case is with the farmers in the agriculture market. So to deal with the apathies of the sellers, like the squeezing of the market price or the squeezing the remuneration in a monopsony or oligopsony market, instead of tilting towards consumers' welfare, we need to tilt towards sellers' welfare, and we need that inverted thinking to be more prominent in our thought processes and in the policy discourses. However, second, the consumer welfare standard is in India is quite flexible. The laws are flexible, and the CCI has taken interpretation where it has gone beyond the mere efficiency gain approach. But we need to very recently we need to learn from the US FTC the way it is approaching the proposed acquisition of a retail chain Albatrosons by another retail firm Kroger. So it's not only taking higher consumer prices and reduced choices, but also in challenging the deal, the FTC is also raising allegations that the deal will reduce competition for employees. The FTC press note says, and I quote, that essential grocery store workers would also suffer under this deal, facing the threat of their wages dwindling, benefits diminishing, and their working conditions deteriorating. So this is a good kind of good directions to take from the gig workers' interest perspective for the competition authorities in future. Again, if we come at the interpretation of the existing tools available under the competition law, I think in determining whether a firm has a market power or not, the control over data, the firm's control over network effect are important, and this has been suggested by the Competition Law Review Committee as well. Similarly, the way the competition enforcement or the competition commission has been determining the presence of entry barrier need also to be changed a bit. So far, generally, the entry barrier is generally looked into as whether there are high investment or whether there are regulatory barriers. And in this sense, coming out with a platform, the investment is low, so there will be no entry barrier. But what we propose is that the commission should think that attaining the critical mass of network effect is the determining factor, not the creation of mere platform. So in determination of entry barriers, the achieving a critical mass of network effect should be taken into account. Again, the relevant market can be defined narrowly, so that there is larger chance of determining whether a firm has a market power or not. I'll also like to, towards the end, I'll also like to flag at least two concepts that need to be further researched from the competition policy, competition law enforcement perspective. One is collective abuse of dominance. Since most of the platform market are duopoly or at most a triopoly, I mean, collective abuse of dominance as a concept, which is there in the EU law, but there has not been much jurisprudence on this. This is lying very dormant and very low. So I think researchers should explore whether this can be a good concept in this digital platform market scenario. Second concept is from the Japanese law, which is abuse of superior bargaining power. And again, there the jurisprudence has is quite weak, and this concept is lying dormant. I think these two concepts are should be future researched by the competition experts to say that whether it is helpful or not. So to end with, I'll say that we should rely more on whole of government competition policy approach, and should not rely much on the competition enforcement alone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ujjwal. Very rich. All these presentations, I think they're very rich in content. And since our panel discussion started 20 minutes behind the schedule, so with your permission, would it be all right if we extend this session by 15 minutes? If it is, some people have to have other commitments, so that's understandable. But if there are any questions, you can raise your hand, or you can put them in the chat box, and preferably directing to a particular panelist or the general question which you can ask one of you to respond to. But one thing which coming to my mind after hearing all of you, that there are anti-competition practices, fine. I'm not supporting them. And with necessary provisions, implementation, enforcement, it may be that the competition authorities, they are in a position to address them. They impose fines, etc., etc. Do they necessarily, or rather, will they necessarily enhance the welfare of gig workers, or will they necessarily enhance the consumer welfare? That's one question that I think we need to address. So, any questions? So, I think it's Friday evening. So, yes, Professor Gangopadhyay, you to unmute yourself. Yes, you have done that.
And this is to ensure that I don't destroy anybody's Friday evening. So please, excuse me. Oh, and I just want to say that, we are slowly getting this habit of asking the Competition Commission to do everything.
Yes.
The Competition Commission's job is not to do all these things. If we have a problem with gig workers, we have to solve it through labor market laws, labor market regulations, labor market policies. Right. Any body of law should have a very clear objective. If the objective is everything, then we have a government for that. We have policies for that.
Then nothing happens.
Law is supposed to be very narrow and focused. Otherwise, law has to be made mandatory. So, it has to be made enabling. So you have to ensure that bad things are not done. But if you ask the law to do good things, then that's a dangerous way of that's what the command and control economy is, right? Writing down rules and regulations to do the good things. The good things will develop as the economy, evolves. Newer and newer things happen, and as soon as anything bad happens, the law, the regulatory body comes down, right? But you have to allow experimentation. If you start trying to make laws to do the good things, then experimentations don't happen.
Thank you. Dr. Sharma, would you like to come and particularly respond to this very interesting point? You have to unmute yourself.
Very right. Please. Yeah, very right. Because that's why I said that it is not the competition law which will resolve the issue. It has to be a combination of IT Act, Labor Code, and the Competition Commission. Competition Commission comes in the value of it and whether you're breaking the competition. But if you're protecting the rights of the gigs workers, I totally agree with what Professor said, that you will have to ensure that labor code is rolled out. We are waiting for the labor code to be rolled out. And once it's rolled out, it takes care of these part-time workers, the gig workers, where there is no employer-employee relationship, but there has to be a contract. So all that can be ensured, and automatically the other welfare measures should follow into it. So,
Please.
that's the only way to go. That's the only way to go. Yeah.
Thank you. Anybody else? Any other panelists?
Ashish
Yes,
this side. Yeah,
please.
yeah. I'm from Rajasthan, and I'm also participator of Rajasthan Welfare Act, and I'm also gig worker. I have worked in Ola, Uber, Swiggy, Zomato. I was working, and my all IDs are terminated, and for that reason, I'm raising this social fight for making a law, and number of protests and number of activities are done in Rajasthan. And I'm also one of a union, Rajasthan Gig and App Based Worker Union. I have around 2,600 member, Ola, Uber, Swiggy, Zomato, Rapido.
What is your question?
Yeah, I want to ask some question. Yeah. So there is some I have some worked with the workers. Some inputs are coming from the for law and for another thing. Some are not thinking they are workers, because they are investing his money on this sector, like cab driver. They investing his money, and for the worker side, they don't understand the law and anything. So this is the first step, which is collect to the Mathadi board. I also visit a Mathadi board.
But the definition of workers is to be looked at very closely.
Yeah. And this is the platform economy, and gig workers and platform economy is the different. Like doctors in Practo, doctor also giving the service to the Practo. This is the platform economy. Like engineers also giving a service to the platform economy, and sales is also run to the platform economy. Like some people are selling his cow and buffalo to the platform economy. So which type of language we use and protect the trade of that economy, and so this will be required. And I want to know, we are running some cooperative initiative, cooperative movement initiative. So anybody have a experience, like what the rules are benefited for the breaking the competition? Yeah, thank you. And Rajasthan rules is we are also getting a protest around 15 days to implement that rules of Rajasthan law.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any other question? Any panelist want to come in for some further thoughts? As Professor Gangopadhyay and Dr. Sharma, they have placed. Sarah, Vela, Ujjwal, Varnali, whoever. Not in any particular.
I think Anirban has raised his hand.
Yeah. Anirban?
Hi.
Yes.
Hi. Thank you so much for this discussion. Very diverse set of perspective that we have heard. I just wanted to have I wanted to understand and have anybody could answer this question. Now, there is a central law that has come in there's a code that has come in. There are state governments which are there. We have seen Rajasthan has coming up with their own laws. The Karnataka we will see that Karnataka would be another state that will coming up with their own. They've started their consultations and all. Now there is being seen there is a there is some change. Some laws are accepted, some laws are not accepted. Do you think that there could be some universal law that could kind of, or some kind of a guideline or a framework that kind of implements to all the states or something like that sort of thing? Because then it becomes very difficult from a platform person also, and people like, if I take a state of Delhi, there would be people who are working from Haryana also, and there would be people working people who are working from Noida also, right? So under which law do they fall? What is that? So do you think that there is there has to be some universal code kind of a thing what I'm trying to make here?
This is a very important point. I mean, we Indians, we love noodles. I mean, perhaps more than the Chinese. So I would request Professor Gangopadhyay and Dr. Sharma to address this point. Yeah. How can we, this is a mess, right?
So I think if Dr. Sharma wants to go first.
Dr. Sharma, your thoughts on this? You have to unmute yourself.
Yeah,
Yes,
I
please.
go first. See, it is very important. I totally agree to what Anirban is saying. There has to be a draft suggestive law with some mandatory conditions which each state has to follow. They can tweak to their local needs. And this has been done in many of the different acts, where the modern rules, the model law, the model draft has been shared with the state governments, and 99.9% they have agreed to it. Right? It may be a few changes, a few tweaking should be allowed to it. So that has to come, because you can't have a differential treatment of the gig workers or the unorganized labor or the labor or the insurance amount which is going to it. We have seen in construction labor things, the amount which was sort of pooled in such huge amounts at the state governments. But when the uniformity comes that you have to pay the construction lady labor 90 days of wages when a child is delivered, then it was uniform all over the country. So that is the way to go about. So that is what I like to say, Anirban. Well raised point.
Thank you. Professor Gangopadhyay or anybody else?
Yeah, now I'll say, you see, the thing is that the point that Anirban raised is very important is indeed very important, and it is something that we missed in our rush to make our points. You see, the thing is that it's a bit like the gaming industry. The betting and all is a state issue, right? And yet the gaming industry had to be controlled centrally because of, as Anirban mentioned in his, example, that if somebody is in Haryana and somebody is in Kerala and they may have different laws, how is the platform, going to implement both the laws on both the sides, right? The cost of the platform then becomes huge because you need a KYC, right? or everybody who wants to get onto the platform. So indeed, I think I rushed a little bit when I said that we should wait for the labor market, but this has to be a central approach. There has to be a central approach. Otherwise, the platform will get restricted into fragmented markets, which destroys the productivity of the platform, if at all. So if we want the platform to get its benefits, its advantages, generate more, a more integrated market, as it were, right? Because India's markets are very, very fragmented. So if we want a more integrated market, then obviously we cannot, make the law, right, fragmented into different states. So I think this is something that the central government, or it has to be a central law mostly, allowing for Dr. Sharma's point that it could be tweaked a little bit. The tweaking have to be very, very, well justified, because otherwise it will, create a fragmentation of the platform market in that particular state. So basically, I would say that we have to start with a very central approach, exactly as we did for gaming, and then sit down and think, right? Do we need sector-wise? I think what Dr. Sharma said earlier, or about sector-wise, thought, that could be an interesting thing, because you can certainly identify geographically certain types of activities that happen, and you can then tweak for those things specific to the fact that they're agricultural workers, food processing. For example, food in India, most of the food processing sector is seasonal. And because it is seasonal, the workers in and of itself are, temporary or without contracts. So you may want to tweak it for the food processing sector a bit. That sort of thing we may want to do.
Thank you. So any other questions, particularly from our GIZ colleagues, Sarah or Bella, are they there?
I think they have left.
Okay. So
their Fridays are more important and serious than we are about our Fridays, for sure.
Yes, could be. So thank you, as this is so rich in content. So in conclusion, my job is certainly not to summarize it, because that's more or less impossible at the moment, at least for me. But the point is that if I just look at some headlines, is that it's the intersection of several topics, subjects, sectors, etc. And also intersection between law and economics particularly. So one size or one type fits all approach is not going to work here, except the fact that the big picture, the broad message is that we need to see that how these workers, there can be better social security for these workers. Then we can say, okay, fine. I mean, relatively speaking, there is good and better jobs for them. What I propose to do is that there are just about a couple of minutes now, even the extended time, extra time, as we call it, that I would request my colleagues, particularly Tasmita and the team who are working on this project, to prepare a brief report out of this webinar, not in respect to who said what, because that's boring to read. Just start with the key messages, maybe 3-4 key messages which came out of it, and then followed by a table. On the left column, we have the major points which are raised, or problems and challenges. On the right column, possible solution, or at least ideas towards those solutions. Then I think it will be easier for us to take this agenda forward. And I think since GIZ is working on this subject, going forward, there could also be possibility to partner with them in taking this agenda forward. There are also other players, other agencies who are interested to work on a very important subject like this. So thank you very much once again. I would again leave you with a question or a thought. I think if I look at the PLFS, Periodic Labor Force Survey data, I'm not getting into the quality, etc., the data. If I look at that data, I see that the unemployment in India is not that large, relatively speaking, right? And there is a reason for it. I mean, we cannot afford to remain unemployment. That's the reason, in my opinion. Given our social structure and economic structure, etc. At the same time, I think it is the classical underemployment, engagement in unproductive work, though some of them may be productive from another point of view. That is another challenge that we need to see how best we can address it as quickly as possible. Of course, there is no overnight solution. And related to that is that I think ours is more of a wage problem, wage and security problem, yeah, rather than instead. And there comes the importance of skills. So the point that Gayatri has made, I think, I mean, all of your point, but Gayatri has made some particular points on that. So going forward, I think we need to see that those guys, informal sector laborers, workers, who are gaining some skills to use new technologies, improved technologies in their work through learning by doing, are they also experiencing corresponding increase in their wages? So that's another question which is coming to my mind. So with that, let me once again thank all of you, my colleagues who have worked very hard, I would say, in organizing this webinar. We have also done some tweets. I would request you to please look at them, and if possible, retweet with further tagging so that we reach out to a larger set of audience. And this is one area where we are going to continue our work, and we'll be in touch with all of you. Let me also thank GIZ for associating with us, for partnering with us in organizing this webinar. And we are going to get back to you with a brief, but I would say hopefully effective report, forward-looking report, forward-looking agenda out of it. So have a nice weekend and good evening, everybody, and good night. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Yes, Suhasita. Okay.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.